Hey everyone, welcome back to Free the Money. Today I'm going to be joined by digital revolutionary Aaron Day, who is the host of the Aaron Day Show. He is the CEO of the Daylight Freedom Foundation, as well as being a best-selling author. Today we're going to dive deep into the rise of technocracy, surveillance, AI, and we're going to get into the Clarity Act and so much more. Let's get into the show. Hi, Aaron. Welcome back to Free the Money. I'm so excited to have you on again. You were actually my very first guest that I've had on Free the Money.
Well, I'm very glad to be back. Thank you for having me again.
You are just putting out so much great information. I really enjoyed you recently on the Dark Horse podcast. I feel like you were always at the beginning revealing information, and then finally the masses are paying attention to a lot of the stuff you've been revealing. I just heard recently, I'm a big fan of all of the music videos you've been putting out, and I heard recently you're actually going to be running for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. I'm curious what made you decide to step back into politics, and I love one of the quotes that I read online. It said, "You're running because free will is not negotiable." I felt like that was very powerful.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting topic to unpack. I actually exited politics after 2018. Although I did run for president, but mainly to raise awareness around the whole CBDC issue. But I've done this before. I ran for U.S. Senate from New Hampshire in 2016. And without getting into too much of the detail, the reason that I ran was that I was heavily involved in politics in New Hampshire at the state level, as was my wife. She ran a group called the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and we helped to get well over 100 people elected at the state level. And in 2012, there was kind of a consensus agreement that the number one thing that Republicans should focus on, this was coming off of the 2012 election where Romney lost, was opposing Obamacare in all of its forms. And so we had this group of faction leaders that met, including the president of the Senate, majority leader, me representing kind of the Liberty side, a few others. And we all came to the agreement that we were going to at least put aside our differences and focus on that one issue. Well, not 90 days after we had that first meeting, it was Republicans in the Senate that actually drafted and proposed Obamacare Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire.
Wow.
So this began a lot of political activism for me to focus on. I would go around to town and county committee Republican meetings, getting people to sign usually complete resolutions opposing what the Senate was doing. Because the number one thing in the Republican Party platform was also opposition to Obamacare. Anyway, make a long story short, I later found that the whole reason that they were pushing Obamacare Medicaid expansion was to protect our sitting U.S. senator's position. Kelly Ayotte was our senator at the time. And there was a belief pushed by John H. Sununu. We have kind of political dynasties in New Hampshire, but there was the belief that unless we reauthorize Medicaid expansion, Ayotte would lose her seat. So I said, well, listen, if you're going to interfere with our state, if you're going to tether the state of New Hampshire to this multi-billion-dollar entitlement tied to Obamacare and destroy healthcare markets, then I'm going to recruit an entire slate of candidates to cost you all of those seats. And so that's what I did in 2016. I wasn't even supposed to be the candidate originally. We'd even started to collect signatures for somebody else. But we actually cost the Republicans all three congressional seats, the U.S. Senate seat and both congressional seats. And I ran for U.S. Senate. I got almost 18,000 votes. Kelly Ayotte lost by 1,100 votes, and everybody definitively knows why that happened. And it was at that point the most expensive U.S. Senate race per capita in the history of the United States.
Wow.
Now, I mean, the thing is, people didn't take advantage of this. The moral of the story here was supposed to be, hey, free staters and people in New Hampshire, we can interfere with these federal races and not have these political dynasties bring in lobbyists and destroy all of the stuff that we're trying to work on. That's unfortunately not what happened. And a lot of them ended up kowtowing and trying to partner with these people. Well, so we're in a situation now where, Trump claimed he was going to do a whole variety of different things. He claimed he was going to end the war on crypto. He claimed he wasn't going to start a war in the Middle East, and a whole variety of other things. And it turns out the opposite is true. The war on crypto has expanded. There are more people now being sentenced, being indicted than there were 2 years ago when we had an enemies of the state party at the Libertarian Convention. And so basically I'm back saying, listen, I'm going to run. And if I'm on the ballot, the Republican will lose. It turns out the Republican happens to be a Sununu, John E. Sununu, who exemplifies technocracy. This is a guy who voted for the Patriot Act. He voted for Real ID. He voted against TARP initially and then voted for it. He became the chair of a finance committee for the World Economic Forum. And then after he lost his Senate seat, his Senate race, he became a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for 10 years for Big Pharma and for many of the technocratic causes that I've been vocally opposing. So if you look at the prediction markets, as of yesterday, there's now only a 53% chance that Republicans will control the Senate. They've probably already lost the House. And so, my position is, end this war on crypto, fire Howard Lutnick, kill the Clarity Act, or, you may lose control of the U.S. Senate. And by the way, I did this when I ran in 2016. It wasn't, people didn't understand. People still to this day don't understand. I gave them a year's advanced warning. I met with the chair of the party, talked to the former Republican governor, met with all of the other federal candidates. I explained what I was going to do if, for these rogue elements, the party is going to go against its platform and to go against the will of the people. And it's the same thing here. I think the difference is that I now have a track record of doing this. I know at the time when I did it in 2016, I was told, nobody believes you're going to do it. No one ever follows through with stuff like this and you won't be successful. And so, I've proven otherwise. And this time I would actually campaign.
Yeah. You have a big reach. You're very popular. I've seen in recent months, you've gotten a lot more popular because you have predicted so much of what is going on right now. It's very impressive.
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of, I started out trying to warn people. I mean, I got into this whole CBDC thing when I saw that people like Ian Freeman and others were being targeted and wanted to understand why. And that's when I learned that, Biden was pushing CBDCs and for a whole government approach to crack down on the rest of crypto. And so when I saw that, then I realized the more research I've done, I'm like, hey, wait, this is part of a bigger technocratic agenda that includes AI surveillance. It includes digital IDs, so on and so forth. So I just keep on following the information where it goes. And, unfortunately, the end part of this is that we're kind of in the late stages here of a global technocratic agenda. And we've seen this, as an example, again, as I mentioned, I ran for president to try to raise awareness on this CBDC issue. Vivek Ramaswamy read my book. We had 3 conversations about it. He ended up convincing Trump the night before the presidential primary in New Hampshire to come out against CBDCs. Wow. And so many people are like, oh man, you must be really excited that you won on this. And it turned out to be a gigantic rug pull in ways that I couldn't predict with this Genius Act. So
could you break down for my audience in today's times what a CBDC actually looks like? And I know you talk a lot about stablecoins, but when people think of CBDCs, they think of China. What does a CBDC look like in America today?
So a CBDC, yes. So the big difference here, when I say a backdoor CBDC, what the propaganda that politicians have been using is to make people fear the central bank issuance of a digital currency. So the idea behind a CBDC is that you would have the Federal Reserve issuing a digital currency. And so if you look at what's going on around the globe, there are 134 countries representing 98% of GDP that are working on CBDCs. Over half of those are beyond the pilot stage. 11 countries have already rolled out CBDCs. And what I learned a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, is that the US has already done 3 CBDC pilots. This is something that has escaped the radar of most people, but all 3, by the way, of these CBDC pilots were done out of MIT in Joy Ito's group, which was, we now know, funded by Jeffrey Epstein, and included some Bitcoin core developers. So, I kind of uncovered that 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been trying to warn people that, before the 2024 election, I'm like, guys, it is currently government policy to push a CBDC. And that's why they're cracking down, and the SEC, the Treasury Department, the IRS, this whole of government approach. But what they've done, what people are actually concerned about when you think about a CBDC, isn't that it's issued by the Federal Reserve. What you're concerned about is that your money can be tracked. You're concerned that your money can be programmed and that your money can be censored.
Debt is at historic highs, geopolitical tensions are rising, and central banks are quietly accumulating gold, the most they've ever accumulated in the century. Historically, when headlines are quiet around certain assets, that's when strong long-term positions are built. Are you ready for what is about to happen? Because right now, many people are just listening to what Wall Street is marketing. However, I use iTrust Capital, and with iTrust Capital, I'm able to buy physical gold and physical silver, many cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP, all inside a tax-advantaged IRA or within a taxable account. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for self-custody, but during these uncertain times, I do believe it is very important to be able to have the ability to cash out quickly and effortlessly without having to find a dealer that's going to give you the best rates. And that's why I truly believe in iTrust Capital. If you sign up using the link down below, you'll get a $100 funding bonus. Take charge of your financial future with iTrust Capital.
Well, actually, it turns out when you look at how our system currently works, we already have most of those things anyway. Most of our money is already digital. There are all kinds of different trackings. I've identified 13 different programs that the federal government is doing. And so it turns out when it comes to financial surveillance, the stuff that we have to deal with all of the time, like the bank secrecy laws and KYC, AML, and all of that, those tracking regulations don't come from the Federal Reserve. They come from Congress. So all of the financial surveillance that we have today, I'm never going to defend the Federal Reserve, but financial surveillance comes from Congress. The Federal Reserve is not going out of its own way to add barriers and cost and surveillance to the system. It's not actually part of their mandate. So all of this comes from Congress. And then you have the Patriot Act and you have suspicious activity reports. All of this stuff is Congress. So what they did was they said, well, we're going to pass this, Trump signs a executive order saying no CBDCs, and people let their guard down and say, hey, we don't have to worry about financial surveillance. Even the way that they debated it on the floor is they would say things like, well, we're not going to become like communist China. And then what they did was they passed the Genius Act, which takes private stablecoins like Tether and USDC, and now USD1, which, by the way, is a Trump family stablecoin, which we can talk about. And it puts those private solutions under the regulation of the United States Congress. So we're getting all of that financial surveillance now. We're getting the KYC, AML. We're getting all of that stuff, but it's being applied to private stablecoins, and they're claiming that this is somehow a victory because it's not the Federal Reserve that's issuing the digital currency. So And last year, there was something like $33 trillion worth of transaction volume using stablecoins, which is more than Visa. And at the growth rates that we have right now, they're anticipating $120 trillion a year in transaction volume on stablecoins, which is more than Visa, MasterCard, and ACH. So they've taken all of that transaction volume and put it under the control of Congress and the Federal Reserve. There's one other point to this, though, that's also very important, which is they're requiring, in order for you to be an official legal stablecoin issuer, you have to back your stablecoin by U.S. Treasuries. So in other words, this is being used to fund government debt. Our Treasury Secretary has said, last time I was on, I might have mentioned this, he said that he thinks we're going to be able to sell $2 trillion worth of treasuries. Now they've upped that to $3 trillion.
Wow. And can you talk Cantor Fitzgerald's connection to Tether?
Yeah, I wrote an article on this for the Brownstone Institute that kind of details all this. It's kind of long to get the whole scenario behind this, but the bottom line is this: until recently, Tether was the largest stablecoin in the world, and then you have this guy Howard Lutnick, who's our U.S. Commerce Secretary. Now, this is kind of an interesting story. Howard Lutnick was not known in Republican politics prior to this 2024 election. In fact, he was a major fundraiser for Hillary Clinton for president in 2016. Excuse me. He gets involved with Tether a few years before the election and makes the largest ever investment in Tether. His firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, invests $600 million in Tether in exchange for getting the exclusive contract to manage treasuries backing Tether. Now, if you're familiar with the history of Tether, Tether has never completed an audit.
Mhm.
And prior to the Genius Act, there was no requirement that a stablecoin had to be backed by treasuries. You just, in theory, had to have enough assets that you could back up one token being worth $1. So you could back it up with Bitcoin, gold, silver, land, whatever it happens to be. There was no regulatory constraint. Lutnick cuts this deal to manage all of these treasuries, then becomes, out of nowhere, the chair of Trump's transition team, which is a very important position. This is a position responsible for recruiting and vetting cabinet members. He actually tries to put himself up for Treasury Secretary. So, I mean, imagine this. You've just negotiated this deal to back all of these treasuries, and now you've become the Treasury Secretary. I think they decided that that's too
Not a good
corrupt
idea.
and not too good. So he ends up getting Commerce Secretary, but they bring in this guy, Bo Hines, to be a crypto advisor. And then you have Lutnick and Bo Hines and others pushing the Genius Act, pushing this stablecoin legislation that, again, captures stablecoin transactions, put it under control of Congress, and forces it to be backed by U.S. Treasuries. So in the end, the largest beneficiary of the Genius Act is Howard Lutnick's firm, Cantor Fitzgerald. So every time you're using Tether, USAT, you are funding government debt, you're funding these wars and everything around the world, and Howard Lutnick's firm gets a cut. So
That's crazy. And I feel like that's not really public knowledge. I don't see many people talking about that online. When I saw an article you had written about that, I'm like, this is really interesting, and I hope this can be exposed more. Because it really does seem like a major conflict of interest.
Well, it's a conflict of interest, but it ties into other things. It ends up tying into Epstein. It ends up tying into a guy by the name of Brock Pierce.
Yeah.
And so it turns out the more that you dig into this entire situation, you realize you have the same people that helped fund the hijacking of Bitcoin also funded USDC and co-founded Tether. Brock Pierce co-founded Tether and funded all US CBDC pilot programs. And so we now have definitive proof of all of these things. And then now on top of that, we have Tether in this position where I believe it was the first officially, approved Genius Act stablecoin with Howard Lutnick and his firm benefiting from it. And then people have noticed, I've been calling for this for a long time. I actually did an interview with the Daily Mail and others. I've been trying to warn people about Lutnick. I did at least one podcast about him and a number of others where I discussed him. And it gets worse the more you dig into it. At first, Lutnick claimed, he met with Epstein once in 2005 and was just disgusted by him and never wanted anything to do with him. And now we find through the Epstein files that he visited Epstein Island with his family. There's literally a photograph from Epstein's Island. They were business partners. They were next door neighbors. And so the story, I haven't been able to prove this conclusively, but it is my suspicion, and I was right on my suspicions 3 years ago about Epstein funding this
Yes,
MIT
you were.
thing. It's my suspicion that that probably some combination of Epstein introduced Lutnick to Brock Pierce, or somehow that relationship. That's where that relationship originated, because Brock Pierce was advising Epstein on crypto matters going all the way back to 2011. And in fact, Epstein was investing through Brock Pierce. And we know which companies, this is stuff that you never get to know. Everybody says, follow the money, but people use these offshore accounts and all this complicated stuff. And so you never can really track it down. For the first time, we can at least track some of it. And it's really eye-opening, like the fact that Epstein invested in Coinbase in 2014. He invested in Blockstream in 2014. He funded the developers that hijacked Bitcoin. Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary and former president of Harvard University, referred to him as Mr. Money on all crypto matters. And so it's just insane. And I'm still going through the information and trying to figure out where it all started and how deep it goes.
So you think their ultimate goal was a central bank digital currency, tokenization of all major assets?
Yeah, it goes worse than even CBDCs. So CBDCs it's tokenized fiat, right? That can be controlled and regulated, but that's only the beginning of it. So everybody always talks about, well, I'm worried about if I speak out against the government or I do something the government doesn't like, I'm going to lose access to my money.
Yeah.
But money represents 5% of the overall assets in the world. It's other things, stocks and bonds and silver, gold, oil, agricultural products and so forth that represent the rest. And so the Clarity Act right now is it's being positioned as a pro-crypto thing. But in reality, what it's doing is it's going to lead to the centralized control and tokenization of everything that we own with CBDC level surveillance, meaning they're going to be able to program, track, and censor everything we own. So in the future, if we say something the government doesn't like, they can shut off our money, shut off our house, maybe even turn off our electric cars. I mean, literally, it's how we end up owning nothing. And it's the biggest piece of surveillance legislation in U.S. history. And I've been warning people about it for 6 months. The problem is most people, and it's not people's fault. I've actually, as I've been digging into this, there's like $200 million worth of lobbying money going into this from banks and a handful of crypto firms that benefit from it. There's no one at the table representing the people or privacy or individual rights.
Woke up this morning, phone already in my hand, scrolling through the feed before my feet hit the land. Sign away my data, never read a single word, gave them all my hours, every word. Something stirring in the cities and the town. Sleepers are awakening, the program's breaking down. We're taking back our time, we're taking back our minds, we're building something new while there's still some falls behind. They said we don't know them and learn to love the cage, but we're writing different chapters on a sovereign page. Money isn't money, it's a chain around our wrists. Programmable permission slips they give us to exist. But parallel economies are rising from the ground. When the old world starts to crumble, that's when we'll be found. The architects of capture never saw us coming through. A million little exits, and we're building something new. We're taking back our time, we're taking back our minds, we're building something new while their system falls behind. They said we own nothing and learn to love the cage, but we're writing different chapters on a sovereign page. They own the screens but not our eyes, they own the feed but not the skies. They build a world of ones and zeros, but we're flesh and blood and sovereign heroes. We're taking back our time, we're taking back our minds, we're building something new while their system falls behind. They said we'd own nothing and learn to love the cage, but every line they wrote, we're turning the page. Turning the page. Turning the page.
And then a lot of these crypto publications are, the crypto press are owned by companies that benefit from the legislation. So you'll actually find when you dig into it that, a publication will write 33 articles for the Genius Act and 0 against. they'll never even discuss the surveillance aspect. So it's actually hard for people to even understand about this, given that most of the information that's being pushed out there is propaganda.
Yeah. You know who I felt did a very good decoding of the Clarity Act? Charles Hawkinson. I think he is probably one of the biggest voices actually going against the Clarity Act and really showing what it's all about. You see like big politicians, and I am confused because there are some big voices out there that I do respect that are posting so much about the Clarity Act in support of it. And I feel like they almost don't even realize the repercussions of the Clarity Act. They're not seeing the fuller picture. I don't know, maybe they just haven't read the whole thing, but I am glad that we at least have some voices actively combating it.
Yeah, I mean, Charles actually, I believe, started out pro these bills and actually got involved in the process thinking that, these bills could be positive. And then after the more time he spent, I think he came around to the conclusion that, hey, we're getting screwed on this. I think that's effectively where he came out on it, and which is great to see. I was warning people in advance that there is no. See, the problem with all this financial regulation is, first of all, the idea that this legislative body that has rung up $39 trillion worth of debt, devalued the currency by 98%, hides the information about their own sexual harassment lawsuit slush fund that taxpayers are paying for, that these are the people that should be providing rules of the road. And by the way, they also engage in insider trading. And so the problem is, what they're doing is they're taking existing law, which is bad. So for instance, the SEC, we have SEC laws that go back to the 1930s. And these are not rules that protect the little guy. These are actually now rules that protect the incumbent. So rather than repealing or replacing things like the SEC laws from FDR's era, or getting rid of things like the Bank Secrecy Act, which has done nothing to stop money laundering and terrorism. It just costs $61 billion a year in compliance costs. Instead of addressing the root cause, we're taking this bad legislation and now we're adding CBDC level surveillance and tokenization to it. I've written this really long article that it hasn't been published yet through Brownstone. It's like 60 pages, but I actually walked through the Genius Act, the Clarity Act. But more importantly, people have to understand the history of financial regulation and how politics actually works, because there are a lot of people that are also getting scammed by the language and the rhetoric that's being used. And this is definitely the case with provisions on DeFi. I mean, they basically outlined, they've set up criteria where no one actually qualifies to be DeFi under the law, under the rules. And then on top of that, it gives rule-making authority to either the CFTC or SEC, who can then overrule that at some point. And so if you're new to the political process and you're taking the propaganda at face value, you end up supporting something that is actually against your own freedom and your own interests. And so when I ran for president, I actually went around with this book, my book, The Final Countdown, and I met with Cynthia Loomis. I met with Ted Cruz. I met with Warren Davis. I've talked to these people. Most of the politicians do not understand how any of this works. Even Ted Cruz said, look, I probably am the most knowledgeable in the U.S. Senate, and I actually don't know much about how this works. I mean, he was even joking around about how little knowledge that they have. And so I'm sitting here like, hey, here's my book. And, I'm out here on what seems to be a fringe case. But when you understand that Larry Fink came out at Davos and said, everything will be tokenized, and you understand what the Clarity Act is all about. And by the way, let's talk about what's in the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act basically says that any exchange for these digital assets is required to capture real-time transaction information so that they can reconstruct transaction histories. They're required to retain those records for 5 years, to share that information with multiple departments within the federal government, and also share that information with foreign central banks. So
know your transaction? Is that like know your transaction then?
Yeah, it's know your transaction. So yes, it's clarity. It's actually surveillance. It's a complete panopticon for all of your digital assets. But that's essentially what it is. And so, Congress has this way of saying, well, we need clear rules of the road and all of these other propaganda terms that they throw out there. No, we don't need complete and total financial surveillance on all of these transactions. And then they have a mixed position on privacy. I mean, on the one hand, they'll say, well, maybe there are some use cases for this, but then in the end, they're going to come down on, still
little guys.
Yeah.
I saw actually the other day on on X, I was just scrolling and there was a young teacher, and I'm not sure what message she had sent, but apparently on Snapchat, you can have like a private story or something. And I think she said she had a private story for 3 people. It was like her boyfriend and maybe 2 roommates. One of the children in her class apparently ruined her lesson plan, like deleted it off her computer. And she sent out a message to these 3 people saying something. I'm not sure what it was, but the FBI ended up showing up in her classroom because of AI, basically watching every single message you send on Snapchat. This message was only sent to 3 people. And immediately my mind goes to, that is such a scary world we're entering into. The fact that they are watching a 2nd grade teacher's Snapchat all day long, and they could easily just turn off her money. They could arrest her for putting out a message to a couple people. And like I said, I don't know what she said.
Yeah, I saw that she had the word shoot in
Okay.
whatever the exchange is, but it's not even necessarily that the context had anything to do with actually threatening to shoot anybody. It was just like that keyword triggered
Yeah.
some kind of Snapchat AI response that led to the reaction that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I did a podcast on this last week or the week before about free speech. I think it was a Technocracy roundtable.
Mhm.
We were just looking at what's going on around the world with free speech and in the U.S. I mean, I always like to point out to everyone that the U.S. is ranked 57th in free speech. Like, we're not. A lot of people think that, yes, we have the First Amendment, but there's really no evidence of it when you look at things like the censorship industrial complex during COVID and all of these other things. But, we had a situation recently where Hillary Clinton went over to the EU and lobbied the EU to use their law to go after Elon Musk to crack down on free speech. So we had a U.S. politician
Yeah.
actually going and trying to use European law to strip U.S. citizens of free speech. And there are other examples, other meetings that have gone on at Stanford, where groups have gotten together of policymakers from around the world to work on getting rid of free speech. Macron from France has talked about free speech being BS. He's actually explicitly stated it. So there is an absolute war on free speech globally.
What we have today compared to what it's going to be in a few years with AI and tokenization, I mean, I could see, and I think you gave this example in one of your recent shows, but maybe you say the wrong thing and all of a sudden you can't sell your house anymore. Because in the end, when everything is tokenized, even people, and they have joked about this, like even human beings being tokenized, who in the end is the actual owner?
Well, so this is an important thing to understand about technocracy. Technocracy is a political ideology. So people are not familiar with technocracy, and often when they hear the word technocracy, they think that it means technology.
Okay.
So you're just applying technology to make things more efficient. But it's an ideology that started in the 1930s out of Columbia University, and the whole idea behind it is, as a political ideology, we as average citizens are too stupid to make decisions for ourselves. And the only way society can function properly is if the best scientists and engineers make decisions for us. And the key element of technocracy is that instead of having a price-based economy like we have based on supply and demand, you actually have an economy based on energy credits, where you basically have, and what they outlined in the 1930s was a social credit system determined by scientists and engineers backed by an energy credit system. And so amazing that they came up with that idea in the 30s, before the internet, before digital currencies, before AI surveillance. I mean, it's kind of bizarre when you think about it. And they would meet and they would wear these gray suits. I mean, it was a real cult. They had some internal dynamics, I think, fell apart for a while, but it was picked back up again in the 1970s when the Trilateral Commission was formed. And so technocracy is actually the basis of UN Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So what they're actually working on through the UN is a technocracy where we don't have individual rights. We don't have property rights. The entire basis of it is that decisions will be made by others. And in fact, when Klaus Schwab says we'll own nothing and be happy, part of the whole technocratic movement is, and why tokenization, the way it's being done, is so frightening, is it is essentially, we are giving up our ownership. And all we get is kind of a digital token IOU. So our use of our assets will be based on whether we comply with the technocratic system. And if we don't, we lose access and the ability to use those assets. So it's a complete transition away from an ownership economy to a technocracy. And it is, in my opinion, it is the most significant threat that we face. It's not a Republican versus Democrat or even US versus China thing, because it's a global political ideology. And as you mentioned at the beginning, to me, it is a war on free will, because at some point, when what actions you're allowed to take in your life are determined by a social credit score from the top down, and they have the ability to surveil you and shut off your access to money and assets, then you have actually lost free will, because you're not really able to make decisions about your own life.
No, absolutely. And that's why you and I think we met because of Zano, why we believe in these privacy projects. And yes, they're small and they're a bit niche, but they are really, really important. I was on a walk the other day with a girlfriend, and we were talking about these threats. And, she lives a very country lifestyle, and she was saying, is crypto bad? Am I opting into this? And I wasn't even aware of it. And I was kind of telling her about, like certain coins are better than others. But I think that is a real argument. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that. They saw what happened with Bitcoin. Like, why do you believe that Zano's different? Why do you believe that Zano can't be hijacked?
Certainly any project could be hijacked. Zano could be hijacked. And I'm not a maximalist of any kind. I actually got to Zano. I've been living on crypto since 2019, and I didn't start out with privacy coins. I was using Bitcoin Cash. I was using Litecoin, Ravencoin, a variety of other coins, mostly on transparent ledgers. And it was in the process of writing my book and seeing my friends get targeted and arrested, so on and so forth, and then understanding about technocracy, where I realized the answer to the surveillance state, the answer to technocracy, is privacy, because the entire basis of technocracy is a centralized control system. So that's how I ended up focusing on privacy coins, and in the last year and a half moved 100% into privacy. And it's not just crypto, by the way. I mean, I use crypto gold and silver. I mean, I have these gold backs.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
1/1000th of an ounce of gold, and I can use those in some places in New Hampshire. And so I'm for all of the above, but you have to have the assets in your self-custody. I think that having gotten to know the team at Zano and actually kick the tires. I mean, I've met these guys personally a couple of times and spent a lot of time talking to them and kicking the tires. A project could be hijacked, but I think what's happening is the people who originally got into Bitcoin because they were interested in peer-to-peer digital cash and a solution to central bank tyranny, a lot of those people got kind of demoralized with what happened with Bitcoin and the block size wars and everything else. And a lot of those people have actually moved back to Zano. So Zano has a community of people that are battle hardened. They're aware of what happened. We lost. The project got hijacked. It's pretty it's definitive at this point. And now, I mean, it only gets worse and worse the more information you learn about it. So which means that we now know that, and we now know what to look for. And we have to assume that people will try to hijack these projects. There are a lot of people that have these theories that say, all these projects are created out of the CIA, and there's no such thing as entrepreneurs forming companies in their basement. And I disagree with that. I think that what we have, in part because of the SEC and the way venture capital and everything is structured, they just wait until a promising technology comes along, and then they control through finances and everything else the ability to dictate and take over the direction and control of the project. And so I think that what I like about Zano is it's been around since 2019, but there's actually technology even before that. And one of the technical founders created CryptoNote, which is the technology behind Monero. I like the fact that we know who the devs are. I think that there was a lot of cult-like excitement about the fact that people didn't know who Satoshi Nakamoto was. And so that ended up getting carried over into some of the early DeFi platforms that turned out to be rug pulls by people that had done multiple Ponzi schemes. So I like the fact that we know who the people are, and it's an open source project and everything, but we have to be careful, and we have to assume that, people will try to hijack it.
Yeah, especially when projects grow and there are threats, but it's good that people are aware, and I think people are more aware than ever now. AI, obviously, every day is getting better and stronger, and in the next few years, I'm very curious to see the world we're living in, especially with tokenization. But just going back to talking about tokenization, How long until you think derivatives and even houses, real estate are tokenized?
I mean, if the Clarity Act passes, I think there's already been $1 trillion worth of assets that have been tokenized. So it's already going on. So technically, a lot of the platforms have been built. For instance, the ICE, the company that is behind the New York Stock Exchange, has invested in and built a platform out. I think I saw that, is it Coinbase or Kraken or maybe both are getting into tokenized equities. Robinhood is as well. And BlackRock has also made investments. And I have to go back to, and I'm doing more and more research on this, Cantor Fitzgerald is going to be a major player in the tokenization of assets. And they've invested heavily in this and are working on a number of projects spanning a number of different asset categories, including real estate. And one of the things that Trump did is he actually signed an executive order authorizing the U.S. to pursue a sovereign wealth fund, which is a highly anti-American concept. You have usually dictatorships or monarchies that have these sovereign wealth funds where they're using the nation's, they're buying assets on behalf of the nation. And in fact, 7% of the assets of the world now are controlled by these sovereign wealth funds. But one of the plans behind this of the sovereign wealth fund was to actually start to tokenize and sell off some of the United States' national assets, some of our own land and some of our own assets. And so Cantor Fitzgerald is right in the middle of this. What I've been warning people is that once the Clarity Act is in place, the technical aspects of this are somewhat trivial. The difficulties are the legal aspect. So I think you're going to see a massive ramp up immediately. I mean, and what I say to people is, because when I'll say something like I'm opposed to the war on crypto, somebody might say, well, I don't care about this. I don't care about crypto. You don't have to be involved with crypto to be affected by this.
Yeah.
If you have a 401k or an ETF or a stock portfolio through a broker like Fidelity or whatever, and this tokenization happens, well, you don't currently have possession of those assets now anyway. Your broker holds them. And so if the broker changes out the infrastructure that they use and goes from the system that they have today, that's something that's tokenized that can be, controlled and censored, that doesn't affect you one way or the other. You won't need to download a crypto wallet to be able to use your Fidelity 401k. And so this is why what I say about the Clarity Act is it affects every American, regardless of whether you own crypto or not, because it is about the digitization, tokenization, and centralized control of everything that we own.
Yeah. Have you heard of Miles Harris before?
I have not.
Okay, I interviewed him a couple months ago, and he talks about the unified ledger, and his entire channel is about tokenization and the control grid. He's very interesting. I think you guys would get along well, but his channel's fascinating. I just also I'm thinking too, with everything being watched, how is this not a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
I mean, this is an issue I've been saying for a long time. I mean, our Constitution, I don't think we've had the Constitution since at least 9/11, possibly even before that. And so it is a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. But then you look at what's going on with all of these developers, the Samurai developers, Roman Storm, so on and so forth. How are they being prosecuted? I mean, all they're doing is writing open source code that protects our Fourth Amendment rights. And so I think our Fourth Amendment rights have been trampled on, and the government always has these ways of using emergency powers to usurp and trump all of the rest of this stuff. But there's another aspect to this that's problematic, which is that in many ways, we've given up these rights subtly, but voluntarily without even knowing it. And this is through what I call click wrap agreements. So every time you download a piece of software, you sign up for iTunes, you sign up for, Amazon or whatever, you use a rental car agreement, you buy an airline ticket, you sign these agreements, right? These terms and conditions. And inevitably people scroll and scroll and scroll, don't read it, and they click accept. Well, just as a thought exercise a year or so ago, I'm like, well, okay, what's in these agreements? And what I've found and what I'm up to so far is that the average American signs 200 of these a year. And if you were to read these agreements, it would take you 2 hours a day, 365 days a year. So, of course, no one could afford to spend that amount of time reading these agreements. But these agreements, when you sign these things, you're giving up your privacy. You're giving up your data. In some cases, you're giving up, for instance, your voting rights. People talk about the fact that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street own all of these companies. Well, that's not actually true. They're managing other people's money. It's not their money. It's money that they're managing on behalf of other people. However, you've given up your voting rights to BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So in essence, they are voting with your money. And that is through the contractual agreements that have been signed. And so I've made the argument, I've even created this site, ownnothing.org, that we already own nothing and that we're just unaware of what we've already given away through these agreements. We don't even buy music anymore. We rent music. And the terms in these things are ridiculous. I actually did a post about X and the terms of service for X. X has the right to basically ownership of everything that you post on there. They can use it to train their AI. If you try to reverse engineer any censorship that they may be doing, that's a violation of the terms of service. If you actually have a complaint and you want to, take X to court, there's one court district in Texas that all actions go through, and your maximum payout is $200. Right. And so, but this is common. Like I put that post out with that analysis, it got like 5 million views, and people are like, oh, I'm canceling X as soon as that goes into place. But what they didn't realize is that all of that had already been in place. There were only a couple of tweaks. There are a lot of artists that say, well, as an artist, I'm not going to allow them to, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's like, that was in the terms of service 3 years ago. You've already given that up, and you just don't know.
I think Instagram is the same. All these platforms are the same.
They are.
They have ownership of your art, of whatever. And for me, so my background was in modeling. And I remember I would put out my work and other publications would be using it. And then I soon realized, I'm like, Instagram already owns this content. And I understand what you're saying about we haven't had these rights for a very long time. But I am curious, with AI and, like I said, things changing so rapidly, is there going to be new legislation to protect us and to even protect the bad people? I mean, no one really is clear of AI.
No, unfortunately, I think not. I mean, I kind of have the same view on AI as I have on crypto. Crypto could either be used for bad, right? It could be CBDCs or these regulated, or you could have privacy coins. AI is the same. And look at what's going on in the AI realm. So, I mean, as an example, recently we've had this situation with the Department of War where, they now they're actually saying that Anthropic and Claude is a threat to national security, and which basically gives a designation that means that anyone that does business with the government can't buy Claude because Anthropic wouldn't allow the Department of War to surveil illegally United States citizens and wouldn't allow the Department of War to use their AI to build autonomous weapons. So when you look at the biggest concern that we have, government is not going to protect us. The biggest threat we have with AI is government. When I was doing research on the free speech thing, I found that Kamala Harris and Biden had actually brought the AI companies in and kind of forced the AI companies to push, pro-woke information and to put filters on the AI. So government doesn't have a very compelling track record in regulating technology in a way where we get the truth. They will say that, for some set of reasons, I guess we can't handle the truth, but the history of government regulation with these technologies does not work out for us. And when you look at how much big tech spends on lobbying, again, there's no one at the table. If you look at Trump's AI policy and even some of the roundtables that they've had, I mean, there's no one there. There's the Google CEO, there's Elon Musk, there's Peter Thiel. There's no one representing the people in any of these conversations. So I don't have any hope that government's going to save us. The thing that I do look for, though, and it's really ironic that the U.S. has these closed source models. All of them are closed source, and China has open source models. And, there's a little bit of a shocker, but
that is very shocking.
Within the next 6 months, China will overtake the U.S. in AI, and their models will be open sourced. You will be able to download them and run them on your computer. And that's going to be that's actually a huge problem that could crash the U.S. economy. I actually wrote a post saying I think this could be, even more than the war in Iran, a black swan, because the only thing propping up the U.S. economy right now is AI. And you have all of these people building data centers and raising money to then take the money to buy other things from AI and kind of this circular, economy situation. But if China comes up with a model that uses 1/10 the energy that's actually a frontier model. It threatens the entire approach the US has been taking, which is closed source on the one hand and then brute force on the other, to say, well, the way we're going to win in AI is more compute power, bigger data centers, as opposed to saying, let's come up with smarter models that don't use that amount of energy. And ironically, it's the tariffs that might be the undoing of the US, because China's like, okay, you're not going to allow us to have the cutting edge NVIDIA chips. We will innovate around it. And now this potentially threatens the entire US position, all of the US companies in AI.
Can you explain closed source to my audience?
I mean, closed source is you can't see the source code. You can't change or tweak the models, whereas kind of like Bitcoin is an open source project. Anybody can download the code, you can view the code. And these Chinese models, DeepSeek in particular, Kimi, and several others, they actually release the code, and you can actually train the models based on your own data and actually change the weights of how the AI itself works. Whereas the US says, no, we're not going to show you the code. Like, I can't download ChatGPT or X onto my computer and run it locally. I have to run it through them as a cloud service. With these Chinese models, I can actually download the entire thing self-contained and run it on my computer.
So you have a website called Technocracy Atlas, I believe. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And that is open source, I believe.
Yeah, it's an open source platform. I haven't released the code yet because I'm working the bugs out. But it's supposed to be an open source research platform, crowdsourced investigations, and it started out 6 months ago, where it was just a place for I downloaded a bunch of primary information, source information on Technocracy, because when you use AI, you can't get information, for instance, that Patrick Wood or any of these other people, Courtney Turner, G. Edward Griffith. There are a whole bunch of sources of information that, unless you know specifically what to ask for, it's never going to come out of a mainstream model. So I bought 200 terabytes worth of hard drive space and started downloading all of this primary source material so that you could use an AI chatbot, not trained on Reddit, but the AI chatbot, when you're asking it questions, it's only querying the actual data that I have, as opposed to what the model is trained on. So it started out originally as a place for people to be able to learn about technocracy, but then the Epstein files were released. And so I'm like, all right, well, let me include the Epstein files. And then more Epstein files were released. And then I'm like, well, look at these other data sets. You have the Pandora Papers, you have the Panama Papers, you have all these offshore leaks with all of this information on LLCs and everything else. Well, what if I put that in there? And then what if we allow people to start to create projects where they can collaborate on things? So we'll continue to add more and more data to the system, but then you can actually have people say, all right, well, let's investigate this. Let's figure out if this is true. And then people can submit other data and other evidence as a way to crowdsource the information. Because if we've learned anything from the Epstein files, is that the DOJ is not interested in solving crimes, and they never have been. I mean, you can actually go back to the history of the DOJ, the Promise database. There's a whole variety of other things. So we're not going to get justice out of that, but we might be able to get the truth. And from my perspective, the most brilliant thing about the Epstein files isn't the sexual stuff. It's actually about the power and the money, and how all of these facets of power and the economy have literally been controlled by a shadowy group of people with specific agendas and motivations. The sooner people realize that, because one of the things I say about politics, even I just gave it my first speech on this Senate race, is I'm like, guys, if you think politics works from the ground up, and that there's grassroots politics, you literally don't understand how any of this works. And part of what I was saying about my own race, it's like, look, I'm running to, get rid of the dynasties and to push a particular agenda here. But make no mistake, that none of this runs from the grassroots. Which candidates can even be selected, so on and so forth. The whole process is controlled, and politicians are just fronts. They're not the people that actually have any actual power.
Yeah, so speaking of the DOJ, I read yesterday that Roman Storm is actually going to be retried in the fall, despite failing to convince a jury the first time around. What do you think this means for open source developers building privacy tools?
I mean, it's a devastating decision.
Yeah.
And I actually chatted with Roman, today. I may have him on. He has a hearing on April the 9th. And I hope he wins his hearing, because The government wants to retry these two elements of the case that were kind of the jury was hung on. So they're actually trying to retry it, which I'm not entirely sure how that even works. I didn't know that
Yeah.
you were allowed to do that. But Roman Storm has spent more than $5 million on legal fees.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had to raise money for this, and now he has to go retry again on these two charges. And so now he was looking at a likely up to 5-year sentence, and now it's up to potentially 40 years based on these other two charges. And so, I mean, my read on this is, regardless of whatever rhetoric is coming out of the administration, understand the administration has said a lot of things. They've said the war on crypto is over. They've said a whole bunch of other things. Their actions say the exact opposite. So they continue to go after open source developers. There's been no relief whatsoever. And Trump is aware of it. I mean, we know Trump said something about Keone Rodriguez. I believe he said he was looking into these cases and everything else. So it's not a question of he doesn't know, because a lot of people will use the example, well, Trump's got a lot on his plate. Maybe he just doesn't know about this. He's aware of this situation, and he's allowing it to go on. Now, I will say, I talked about this in my last podcast. The war on crypto has ended for some people. Trump pardoned CZ from Binance, and I'm not saying whether CZ did anything wrong or not. I mean, he may very well have been innocent as well. However, he got pardoned and then went on to actually create USD1 for Trump. So Trump's family stablecoin was created by CZ, and then CZ went on and raised $2 billion for World Liberty Financial through Abu Dhabi, and then now I believe owns 80% of USD1. So you have that, and then you also have Justin Sun, who had his case dropped, and Justin Sun is the largest holder of the Trump meme coin. I mean, at one point he had $73 million worth. I mean, I don't know, maybe worth 73 cents now, but at one point I think he bought like $73 million worth, was the largest holder, and even got invited to the White House because Trump did something where the top 100 holders of the coin get to go to the White House. So his case was dropped. So in these cases where people end up doing $100 million to $1 billion deals with the Trump family, their cases have been dropped. But if you are someone who's promoted economic freedom or promoted privacy and you don't have a deal with the president, then
or like
you
a littler person. Yeah, but you know what's also really strange is, I also read this yesterday. It said the Department of Treasury admitted that crypto mixers have legitimate privacy uses. So I thought that was pretty interesting that news was put out the same day that they were also saying that Roman Storm was going to be retried.
Well, while they said they're legitimate uses, it'll be interesting to see how they actually frame what that ends up looking like, because my guess is that it's going to end up negating. I don't know how they're going to be able to do it in a way where they're going to be able to figure out what people are doing, but the public can't. I'm not sure. Like, it was really sketchy and vague in the way that it was listed. But one thing that I'd like to say to people, because I think we've lost the plot here, the whole point of the Constitution was to explicitly limit the federal government into what it can do. And all of those other rights go to the states and go to the people. And so this whole idea on financial privacy, I don't know how we've backed ourselves into this idea that wanting or having financial privacy is a bad thing. It's an inherent right, and it's nothing. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the government the control over this. But with all of that said, there are people that look at this and are trying to rationalize this and come up with ways of explaining this. But have you noticed that despite these stable coins and everything else, you know who's not using them? The government's not using them. Governments are not putting their own transactions on public ledgers that can be publicly audited.
No, they use Monero probably.
They use Monero, or they use the fraudulent Federal Reserve and an Oracle database and everything else. And Catherine Austin Fitts has suggested that there's somewhere between 21 and $55 trillion of money missing. The Pentagon has not been able to pass an audit. And so, like, we should not give up on the ground that, we're somehow guilty for wanting financial privacy when it's the government that's supposed to be restricted. They're not. It's not. The government transactions are not transparent. And now they have the gall to say that all of our transactions should be monitored in real time, with the entire transaction history documented, given to government databases, including foreign central banks. Why does that even make sense? How does that make sense?
It makes no sense, but we don't even have privacy with cash anymore. And I think Catherine Austin Fitz gave this story recently. She was talking about maybe someone emailed her that they went into Walmart, they left their phone in the car, they only had cash, they paid with cash, they get back into their car, and all of a sudden they have the Walmart receipt on their phone because there's cameras in Walmart and they had a facial recognition. But I even had something weird the other day. I was actually with like a prepaid debit card, DART card that I had loaded up with crypto. And I received a receipt from the company when I did not input my phone number or email address. And I'm like, this is crazy. But it's facial recognition. The companies are recognizing you. And if you've been a customer there before, it's really easy. It almost seems like there's no way out.
Well, it's tough. I mean, the odds are not necessarily in our favor, but we've got to exit these systems. This is why, I mean, when I ran for president, I had this shirt with a heart on it that said, it actually said bank run now. And I've changed it to ditch the dollar, but then it said halt CBDCs, stop World War III and the Fed. Right. The whole point is, we can talk about, audit the Fed. We should do all this other stuff. But, if we keep using the dollar, even in cash form, we are participating in the system. We're funding the system. We're allowing all of this to happen. And so I'm still hopeful. I'm going to still push on trying to convince people to exit fiat and start using these other systems and building parallel.
Absolutely.
There's no escaping a global technocracy. There are a lot of people that are kind of like, I'm going to be able to hide over here. We're going to have this community. But when you look at what technocracy is all about, whether it's UN Agenda 2030 or frankly what Trump is now doing with the Board of Peace, which I encourage people to look at this Board of Peace. It's this entity, it's this multinational organization that Trump is the chair of for life, who has veto power on all of the decisions. Member countries have to donate $1 billion each. The U.S. donated $10 billion each. And of course, one of the first things the Board of Peace went and did was, launch World War III in Iran. But what's frightening is the people that are on the board are people like Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, the CEO of Apollo Group. And really what it is they're making money on reconstruction projects. So one of the biggest projects of the Board of Peace is they're building a technocratic state in Gaza. They want to displace 2.3 million people in Gaza. It's a $112 billion project, and they want to use a stablecoin, which is, again, I'm saying is a backdoor CBDC, as the currency for this technocracy. So this is real. This is going on right in front of our faces. And, what's Iran going to be? Is Iran going to be a new, another new Trump resort location? I mean, all of these things.
I think it's too soon to speak on Iran. Like, I really hope we don't see that. I think like in the next month we'll really know. I think at times like this, I don't remember if we got into this last time, but it's like we have to put our faith in God at some point. And that's why I really admire people like you that are actively working day to day to fight against the establishment, to fight against these evil forces, to build a parallel economy. And there is a great new app I saw that was launched a couple days ago. I was just pulling it up on my phone, but it's through bitcoin.com. It's for merchants. They can accept any cryptocurrency and it makes it so easy. So like we should be encouraging stores or even like going to the farmer's market and trying to have them accept crypto. And this is like a way that we can actively fight, and hopefully it will lead to more prosperity for the everyday person.
I definitely agree with that. And, my campaign is the big thrust of my campaign, if I have to go through with it, is basically no one in DC is going to save you. So I'm going to go around the state of New Hampshire doing workshops, teaching people how to take their sovereignty back, starting with teaching people how to use, privacy coins, teaching them how to use, things like Zano and Freedom Dollar and ZBack debit card and so forth. And then I'm going to also teach them the next big area that people need to exit is the healthcare system. Yeah. And so what I've been encouraging people to do is form a medical trust, because every minute in this country, someone files for medical bankruptcy. And 75% of those are insured. So insurance doesn't actually provide catastrophic coverage like you think it does. When you actually get into this position, it turns out they'll deny you, they'll only cover this, they'll only cover this. And this, therefore, we end up in this situation where one person every minute is filing for bankruptcy. So form a trust to shield your assets, cancel your insurance, which people can't afford and is actually useless, and look at medical tourism, where you can go overseas and save 80% and get better health outcomes. And this isn't just, cosmetic procedures or whatever. This is like complex heart surgery, cancer treatments, things that you can't even get in the United States. It's a $100 billion business. And so I've created this site, my wife and I have, called OSARA. And it's a medical tourism marketplace. And then we're actually suggesting when we do connect the consumer with the medical facility, we introduce them to, Freedom Dollar and Zano, because one of the issues in paying for medical tourism is, let's say you go to get a procedure in Thailand and you go to your bank and you want to, wire $15,000. Well, your bank is going to look at you suspiciously, and you may actually have difficulty and get blocked doing that kind of transaction. Same issues with credit cards and PayPal.
Yeah.
So this is another perfect example of where we can exit some of the systems that are causing us the most tyranny here in the United States and use free markets around the world with privacy coins and alternative currencies to get a better outcome.
Absolutely. So say I wanted to go to the doctor and maybe I had an ear infection or something and I needed to go to the doctor pretty soon. Would I be able to go to a doctor within my town or within my state at least? Or is this all international?
Right now, to start, it's international, but part of what I'm hoping happens is that we're going to add doctors around the United States that are cash only. There's a real problem within the United States where if you're captive to these systems, increasingly doctors have to work within hospitals, and then the hospitals are dictated by Medicare and Medicaid, because at this point, the government is actually the largest purchaser of healthcare between Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA. So they're actually setting all of the terms. And so there are doctors that are trying to move out of that system. So we're going to hopefully build out a bigger map for that. So, but for right now, it's, we're focusing on big ticket items, and then hoping people come on board for this as well. A lot of doctors can't take these alternative payments. Like, you're required to work within the system. And in New Hampshire, which, we're supposed to be the freest state, but as I mentioned, I got into politics fighting this Medicare expansion. We because of the funding ties that we have due to Medicaid and all these schemes that people have put in place, all we've seen is a further consolidation of hospitals. So there are fewer locations for you to go to. And one of the things that's really frustrating about healthcare in the US is hospitals are required by law to disclose their pricing, but only 17% actually provide the pricing. They opt instead to spend $300 a day in penalties because they're ripping people off. You have no idea what you're going to get billed. So they may charge, and I'm not kidding when I make this up, 150,000% markup on alcohol swabs, or a 70,000% markup, or they'll charge you, 1,000 times for aspirin, and you have no ability to know the pricing up front. You have no ability to negotiate it, and so in the end, you just get this bill for like $60,000, and you're looking at this, and you have no ability to dispute it.
Happens all the time, especially with like insurance fraud. So I do want to talk about Monerotopia. So you were in Mexico for Monerotopia. What was your experience like there? And you were able to meet with the Zano team there as well?
Yeah, I was at Monerotopia, and then I was in Anarchapulco and Puerto Vallarta, that's a whole other story. So Monerotopia was really interesting because the person who was supposed to speak in front of me was Ray Youssef, and then Ray actually spoke at the previous Monerotopia, and he came up and was like all supportive of the stuff that I was doing. I was actually really excited about the fact that he was speaking immediately before me, because I thought it'd kind of ramp up the energy and everything. So we show up. I think I had to do an interview, so I didn't actually show up to the conference until the later part of the afternoon. And I'm like, hey, where's Ray? And people are like, we don't know the full story, but he switched his time, spoke in the morning, and then we were told that basically 5 feds showed up, flashed their badges, and took him away. So like we're at nobody knew at that point what had actually happened to Ray. And I texted him and I'm like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, brother, I'm fine. But he wasn't able to elaborate until a few days later. And then we find out he was deported from Mexico to the US. He was indicted, similar charges that Ian Freeman is under. And so now his case is out of the federal court in Sacramento. And I ended up having him on my podcast the next week. So that was one real interesting part of Monerotopia. The other thing is Amir Taki was supposed to be there. And Amir was at the previous Monerotopia as well. And, he's a very early Bitcoin developer working on something called DarkFi. And so he was not able to get into the country. So there was one aspect of it. It's like, okay, it's weird. So people are either having a hard time getting into Mexico or getting deported out in the conference. But the conference itself was great. I mean, I actually really love Monerotopia. I mean, it's in the main talks are in this big geodesic dome. There's a whole marketplace outside where you have all of these Mexican vendors that a lot of them are taking Monero. And the thing that I like about it is that it's a really constructive vibe, because even though it's called Monerotopia, there are a number of privacy projects there. So the Zano team was there, but you had the Edge Wallet guys, the Cake Wallet guys, the Monero guys, and Dash. You had Joel there, Sal the Agrist. And so, everybody's aligned on the idea that, it's privacy. We're not fighting against each other in this privacy space. We're fighting against these authoritarians. We're fighting against technocracy. So that's the thing that I really appreciate about that event.
Yeah, it looked amazing. I got invited and I would like to go next year. I had some other obligations, but I love that you said that it's not about tribalism. It's about working together and trying to combat evil, basically, technocracy and everything. And yeah, big believer in Edge. I work with Edge and I think they are one of the best wallets out there. Super user friendly. So that's awesome. And then what was your experience like after Monerotopia with the cartel wars? I saw that you were in Mexico during that time, and you stayed to report, and you were actually surviving because you were using ZBEC card. You were able to extend your trip seamlessly. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously I live on crypto anyway, but I've increasingly over the last few months, ZBEC is my go-to. And I mean, your audience is probably already familiar with this, but the thing that I like about ZBEC is I can load Freedom Dollar or Zano instantly on the card. And I've used different debit cards, and sometimes it's like you have to wait 3 or 4 hours, and then sometimes it'll get stuck, and then based on the price differences, you have no idea what's going on. So I've actually found using Freedom Dollar with ZBEC is really low fees and instant. And so I use it for everything, buying the flights, Uber, the whole trip basically was paid for using ZBEC. And the conference was great. I mean, actually Monerotopia, Anarchapulco was a great conference, and I gave a talk, and my talk was the creature from Epstein's island. So I was talking about all the stuff we've been talking about with the hijacking Bitcoin and Epstein and Tether and all of that, which was really well received. So we had a table there. So just talked to, I don't know how many people. It was just a lot of great people to interact with. And so the whole conference was great. And Puerto Vallarta was absolutely beautiful. We were staying at this resort. And then the last day was a Sunday. And I had one more talk. I had 2 talks during the week, and we decided to stay at the hotel because my talk was in the afternoon. And we woke up and we're getting ready to go to breakfast, and we looked outside, and there were these 3 plumes of smoke. And so my wife was asking the hotel staff what's going on, and no one would say anything to us. No one would actually tell us what was going on. I thought, well, maybe it's just a fire, right? I didn't have any context for it. So I'm on my iPad or whatever trying to search the news, and there's no information. So we go to breakfast, and now smoke is starting to waft. I mean, it actually was something that it looked like the fires were in a distance, but now all of a sudden we're smelling smoke out on the beach. And no one's really paying attention, no notifications from the hotel. And I'm on my iPad and scrolling through my feed, and I see Dan Dix, who is one of the people participating in Anarchapulco, who's also an investigative journalist. And he's like, cartel wars break out in Puerto Vallarta. And I'm like, is this a joke? First I thought it was a joke, and then I listened to it, and sure enough, there were these little mini explosions or whatever all around Puerto Vallarta. And so we went back to the room, and we're a little concerned at first. And because at some point, and this was a great experiment in, how we can't trust any of the information anymore. Okay? This is true with the war in Iran. I actually really have absolutely no idea what's actually going on.
Same. That's why I haven't said anything about Iran online.
Yep. Because, governments are going to use propaganda on both sides. Most of the stuff is AI driven.
Yeah.
And so I saw in Puerto Vallarta how there was no official reporting. There was nothing from the government. There were no sirens. There was like 8 hours of just stuff going on, plumes of smoke everywhere, but with no sirens and no, indication that there was any police activity. And so I'm watching these things come up on the feed, and one thing comes up, and I don't even know if it was actually true, but the cartel was saying, allegedly, if their demands weren't met by 5 o'clock, they were going to begin going into people's individual houses and go to resorts and start killing people. So I'm like, all right, well, that's a little frightening. I wasn't, we weren't thrilled about that. But then 5 o'clock came by, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then everything just kind of died down. So we ended up staying for an extra 5 days, and we never left the resort. And I'm kind of like, I mean, in all honesty, the biggest hardship is that I could only get, one towel per day for the cabana instead of 2. Like so I don't want to make it out like it was this big thing, because it really wasn't. But I was noticing people were like, oh, do you want to come? I went on Mike Adams' show, and I'm just kind of like, all right, well, I don't know. I'm not wandering out in the street taking pictures of this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I did see these AI clips would show up where it's like shooting going on at the airport. There's a plane on fire at the tarmac, everything else, all fake. And then I would see mainstream media a day or two after picking up on some of these fake stories. And so then I realized, like, the only thing I can actually count on are people that I know in a situation doing investigative journalism. Everything else is either clickbait, propaganda, or whatever. And so we ended up, we were fine. It turns out we couldn't have gotten back anyway, because there was a blizzard and 3 feet of snow in Boston. So we had already changed our flight. So this didn't really alter our endpoint. It just, there was a little bit of, are we going to be able to get to the airport? Is our flight going to get out? That kind of thing. But overall, the media made way, way, way too much and out of it. And we still don't know what the real ordeal is. I mean, you actually talk to people in Mexico and they're kind of like, well, some people prefer the cartel to the government just based on the level of corruption of the government itself. But Puerto Vallarta is a beautiful place. The people at the hotel were wonderful. I mean, they were forced to stay at the hotel because there was a shelter-in-place order. So you had like 4 or 5 women staying in one room, and the guys would have to stay in these other rooms, and so they didn't get to go home to their families. And so I have a lot of respect for, everything that they did just to keep everything together. And so it's a beautiful place, and we still don't know what the real ordeal is.
Yeah, what the real issue was, why America was like going crazy with this in the media. There's always an agenda behind everything. And that's why these days, I feel like I'm not actively, when I see news, I'm not reacting right away, because like you said before, we don't know what's true, what's not. There's propaganda on both sides. And I think it's harder than ever these days to tell what's real. And it's just going to get significantly worse, like we said, with AI getting more sophisticated day by day. Right now, I guess, like, what would be your advice to my audience figuring out what's real versus what's not?
Definitely use discernment, and it's not even enough to like try to take both sides of an issue and try to like average out what that means,
Yeah.
because both sides can be completely manufactured. So, what I'm doing right now is, I try to find alternative sources. So I'm in some Telegram groups. Somebody introduced me to this Telegram group when I was in Puerto Vallarta, and I don't even know what the group is, but apparently they somehow managed to get accurate information. So I was getting like video feeds from people that live in Puerto Vallarta, stuff that's not even on the social media feed.
Oh,
And so
cool.
then when the thing in Iran happened, I'm getting different feeds from that as well.
Mhm.
And so so I use that right now. That's kind of my primary go-to, but I don't know how much of that I believe, but just understand that our government, all governments use propaganda, including our own. So I even had an interaction with Grok on this, because we know some people in Israel. So there is absolutely stuff going on in Israel. They are getting bombed. And so there's some people that are trying to make the claims, but then there are other people like, we wiped this out and Netanyahu's dead and everything else. There's no evidence, for that. And so but even when Grok, for instance, if you tried to ask Grok for something, it will say, well, no, this is false because these publications said so, these official sources. And then you ask it, well, okay, do those sources engage in propaganda during wartime? And Grok will say, yes, those sources engage in propaganda. So you can't even trust that. Like, is the BBC a reputable source? Is CNN a reputable source? If the State Department says something or the Department of War says something, would you believe that? So I would urge people to not to not believe anything by default, and
Yeah,
then to try to, try to find some sources that are
for sure.
reporting accurately. And if you know people that actually know people, I'm going to go back to what I said about the thing in Mexico. I had a pretty good handle on what was going on because there were like 3 investigative journalists from the conference. One of the guys has lived in Puerto Vallarta for 7 years. And so I had a pretty good handle on what was actually going on. And in the end, that was the only thing that was accurate. Everything else was fake.
For sure.
So
Yeah, if you know people that actually live in these countries or towns, that's obviously you're going to get your best information. Or if someone's a journalist, that makes a lot of sense. Well, do you have any other projects you're working on right now? Maybe any new books that are going to be coming out?
yeah, I have a lot of projects. So there's daylightfreedom.org lists all the various projects. We talked about Technocracy Atlas and Own Nothing and OSR. I am potentially working on this book, The Creature from Epstein's Island, and I actually may publish it through a couple of different venues. I may work on it over the summer because it turns out, I could take the article that I've written and turn it into something. But what I'm thinking of is something that's kind of like the cross between G. Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island and The Big Short. Because I write a lot of articles, and sometimes it's like, okay, here's a 7,000 word article, and I'm talking about, tokenization and all of this other stuff. And I write it because I want to have the thing there as a reference, but I know a lot of people are not going to read it. But I think that there's a way to tell the truth about what's going on with technocracy, the digital currency space, Bitcoin, all of this other stuff that leads into the Genius Act and Clarity, that if people read it, you'd be like, wow, okay, how do I exit from this? I thought The Big Short was a great book and movie because it was able to kind of make an exciting story of something that people actually lived through, but then actually have these little snippets where they explain financial terms throughout it. So that's the way that I'm thinking about approaching it. But there's, frankly, some of the story needs to come to a conclusion, and there's more information that needs to be to be gleaned from this. But as I've been giving talks on this, people have been coming up to me, telling me things about Brock Pierce, telling me things. I won't say what they are now because they're things I want to validate these things.
Yeah.
But the story, let's just say the story isn't getting any better. It's kind of devastating in terms of looking at what's actually happened to this entire crypto space, and then what we're facing now with technocracy. So anyway, that's a book that's on the horizon, and like I said, I'll figure out this summer if I want to go forward with it. But I can say there is interest. You mentioned I have been getting traffic lately, and the reason, after years of not getting traffic, is because of the Epstein information, and because I wrote about the Epstein stuff. And when I wrote about it 3 years ago, I even wrote about it in my book, that it's kind of going through the stages of grief. When I wrote about it originally, everybody's like, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. And then when the first batch of Epstein stuff came out, where it's like, okay, well, we now know he funded this MIT group, then all of a sudden the narrative shifted to, oh, that's old news. And now, it's fascinating to see the levels of cope as more and more information comes out. And at some point, I think it would be in people's best interest to try to disassociate yourself from projects when you see that they've been clearly hijacked.
Absolutely. No, I think that's very wise, and there's plenty of other good projects to support. I'm going to push this again, but I love Zano. You love Zano. You can have private Bitcoin on Zano. There are so many great projects that are going to help you take back your sovereignty, and I think it's really important. We got to be pushing privacy coins so that people can understand and learn about them and not be intimidated by crypto anymore.
Oh, and on that front, I should mention this because I just started playing with this now. So for my campaign, I haven't started raising money yet, and in part it's because I refuse to have a bank account. Which is a bit of a challenge, right? Because how many people are there? So I'm using this thing called coindonor.com. And I'm just playing with it now, but it's pretty cool. They accept Bitcoin, Ethereum, and 12 other major coins, including, importantly, Zano and Freedom Dollar. So I can use that for my campaign. And then I'm playing around now with some other solutions that will allow me to take credit cards, but where the credit card automatically gets settled in crypto.
Oh, cool.
So as soon as I get that together, but I encourage people to look at this coin donor because it's so far in the, I've already set it up. I just haven't launched it through the site, but that's a new project that does accept both Zano and Freedom Dollar. So I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. And we can be donating. If you guys would like to support Aaron and, he's putting out such great work, please, once it's all set up, please donate to his campaign. Your money will go a long way. We need more people like Aaron helping fight for us. So I think that's really important. And then where can my audience follow you?
The best place to follow me is on X at Aaron R. Day. And then you can find me at daylightfreedom.org and day2026.com. Those are, kind of the three best places right now.
Awesome. Well, best of luck with everything. Keep up the amazing work. You are by far one of my favorite people on X. I always look at your page to find out what's going on because, like I said, Aaron is always on top of things. He figures out things before the general public knows. Like, he's years early. So if you want a clear path to what's going on, definitely follow Aaron and support him.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.